The Sly Stone documentary, directed by Questlove, is about to appear on Hulu, and it would be an understatement for me to say that I'm excited as hell about this documentary. One of the most enigmatic, talented, and boundary-shattering artists-musicians is about to have his story told, including the good, the bad, and the ugly. And the title of this documentary is Sly Lives, aka The Burden of Black Genius. So it has to be understood that when it comes to Sly and the Family Stone, you're talking about a late 60s band that was not only integrated, it had black and white members, but there were also men and women in this group, which again, think late 60s, an integrated band, that was not the norm. I mean, a couple of years later, you would get some more integrated bands like, the Allman Brothers in 68, 69, 70 and beyond. They were an integrated band. They had have a black drummer, J-Mo, who's actually the last living member from that original classic Allman Brothers lineup. But yeah, in the late 60s, to have an integrated rock band, that was in itself pretty revolutionary. Not to mention the style, the mix and blend of genres that were at play here. You had elements of psychedelia, you had soul, you had straight up rock and roll, rhythm and blues, a lot of gospel. This was a very eclectic sounding band, and they were also just on the bleeding edge, the precursor of funk music. They say that if James Brown and his bands were the godfathers of funk, well then Sly and the Family Stone, they took it to that next level. They essentially perfected and evolved funk music. And again, they did so within the context of those other genres that I mentioned. And it's such a fascinating story when it comes to Sly and the Family Stone, because Sly Stone, he was born in Texas, but largely came of age in the Bay Area, Vallejo, California. That's the city that E40 is from. Well, Sly Stone, he was always playing instruments from like a young age. He was in like early gospel family bands because his siblings were not only musicians, but they actually featured and were members of Sly and the Family Stone as well. In fact, him and his brother had their respective bands, and then they came together, had a discussion in the kitchen to merge their bands together, and then they went about trying to figure out a band name, which eventually they landed on Sly and the Family Stone, which had previously gone through different iterations of different name, experiments. Like, Sly's name is Sylvester Stewart, so somebody had misspelled writing his name, I believe, on a chalkboard while he was in school, and they put Slyvester Stewart, so that inspired him to say, wait a second, Sly. And then for a while, one of his early bands was called Sly and the Stoners, and he was also working at a Bay Area radio station. I think it was K-Soul. So he was, experimenting with different names until he finally landed on Sly Stone, and he liked it because Sly was kind of like a finesse word, and then Stone was a solid word, so there was kind of a juxtaposition between the two. And even before that, when he was like in high school, he was starting bands, and one of the early band names was like the Biscaynes, which was like the name of his car at the time. But then being that they were from Vallejo, they changed it, replacing the B with a V, so they were the Viscanes for a period. But again, he then got a job as a radio DJ for K-Soul, so he was kind of working on his persona around that time. And again, he had developed his own band, his brother Fred had developed his own band, they combined the bands, and they eventually got to Sly and the Family Stone, which included Sly Stone, his brother Freddie Stone, his sister Rose Stone. It included Cynthia Robinson, who was a singer and a trumpetist. The band included Jerry Martini and Greg Errico. Those were the two white members of the band. And the band included Larry Graham, who might also be known to this generation as Drake's uncle. Think about that. Drake's uncle was the bassist in Sly and the Family Stone, and later started the band Graham Central Station, who had a popular good run in the 70s, and he also had some good and popular solo material, Larry Graham did. But yeah, Larry Graham was an original member throughout all those hits, Everyday People, Family Affair, Thank You for Letting Me Be Myself. That's Larry Graham, Drake's uncle, who's playing the bass in those songs. They eventually had a falling out between Larry Graham and the Stone siblings, which actually resulted in a fight between Sly Stone's entourage. This is reportedly Sly Stone's entourage and Larry Graham's entourage, a big brawl. This, I believe, was in 72, and Larry Graham left the band. There was also a rumor that Larry Graham had put out a hit on Sly Stone at a point. Yeah, the story gets pretty crazy, and a lot of the Sly and the Family Stone story is pretty crazy. But when you think of Sly and the Family Stone, you have to think of it in the context of when they were really in their heyday, like when their prime was. They formed in 66. They came out with their first album in 67, which wasn't a popular album. It didn't really chart, nothing like that. But their next album ended up being really popular, and the label that signed them was trying to push them to make a more accessible record. That resulted in Dance to the Music. That was 1968, successful record that essentially launched Sly and the Family Stone. Now their next album, Life, that one didn't do so well, but the album after that was where they really hit their peak with Stand in 1969. That album featured their first #1 hit, Everyday People. That's probably the most popular and widely known Sly and the Family Stone song. Yeah, so Everyday People was on that fourth album, Stand. Again, that's where their peak really begins, 1969. But as soon as they hit their peak, and by the way, that whole album, Stand, fantastic album, give that a listen. But shortly after they hit their peak and they performed at Woodstock, like they were one of the better performances, like reputation wise, they killed it at Woodstock. In fact, I've got the vinyl of their Woodstock performance. I mean, this was a bad band when it comes to the live performance. Like they were so dynamic, and Sly Stone, you know, in terms of his aura and his performance presentation, this guy was second to none. And again, this band is crossing over. This isn't just on one side of the dial. No, this band grew very popular across demographics. And by 69, they were one of the most popular and successful bands in the world. But shortly after they hit this peak, they started to pick up their drug use. They moved to LA in 69. They started messing around with cocaine and PCP, which, I mean, if you know something about LA in the 70s and 80s and into the 90s, and you know something about PCP, you know that that's a very powerful drug and what that does to people. But yeah, they stopped at that point being as productive. They got less reliable in terms of when they would and would not show up to their own shows. So between 69 and 71, they had very little output. Like they had such little output that the label ended up deciding to just put out a greatest hits Sly and the Family Stone album to just fill up the time, because they really, between the end of 69 and 71, they really only had one release of new music. It was a single. It was Thank You for Letting Me Be Myself Again. That ended up being one of the more popular Sly and the Family Stone songs. In fact, that is the second #1 hit from the band. So even though they were not like really productive around that time, basically after Stand, they dropped Thank You for Letting Me Be Myself Again. They dropped that at the end of 69. That single had a B-side, really nice song called Everybody Is a Star. I love that song. In fact, the Roots, to kick off their, I think it was the Tipping Point album, they sample Everybody Wants to Be a Star. It's just a lovely melody, very nice, soothing sound, and a big contrast to the A-side, Thank You for Letting Me Be Myself Again. But again, they dropped this during their non-productive, drug-filled period where the band started to kind of fray, started to have a lot of inner band turmoil, which resulted in a lot of that, you know, the Larry Graham stuff that I was talking about and other members leaving like a couple years later. It started to get really ugly, but the turning point was basically after Stand. And I just wonder how this documentary is going to cover that portion of the career, because it started to get a lot darker around that time. And I know that this documentary, it pulls from a couple previous Sly and the Family Stone documentaries. Like it pulls from one called Small Talk About Sly, and it pulls from another one called On the Sly in Search of the Family Stone. So some footage, interview footage from there is used here. And the other contributions in terms of people talking about the band and kind of giving their take, the contributions are going to be coming from Questlove, Andre 3000, D'Angelo, Shaka Khan, Q-Tip of A Tribe Called Quest, Nile Rodgers, the famed guitarist who played on everything from David Bowie to Chic and, you know, Daft Punk featuring Pharrell, all that stuff. Nile Rodgers has a very signature sound. Jimmy Jam and Terry Lewis, two of the greatest songwriter producers of all time, they're going to be contributing as well. George Clinton of Parliament, Funkadelic, Mr. P-Funk, right? He's going to be contributing, and it's kind of fitting that he's going to be contributing because late in Sly Stone's career, he started working with George Clinton on some Parliament and Funkadelic releases like the Electric Spanking of Water Babies. I forgot exactly what that title of the album was, but yeah, that 1980, 1981 material features some of the work of Sly Stone. So George Clinton, I'm sure he's got a lot of insight to provide. And then you've got Ruth Copeland, who was a singer in P-Funk. She's going to be contributing. And then you've got Clive Davis, the famed mogul of an executive. Now, this is where I kind of wonder how they're going to play this, because you have, certain contributions would be from artists who, I'm sure that they have, good opinions and interesting opinions about Sly and the Family Stone. But they weren't like the boots on the ground at the time that this band was taking off or coming down, right? They are basically fans who have themselves had great careers, like D'Angelo, Andre 3000. I'm sure that they've got a lot to say. And when D'Angelo dropped that latest album, Black Messiah, Questlove was saying that that's the new There's a Riot Going On, which I'm about to get into. But you've got artists who could give good opinions, but I'm more interested in hearing from the people who are either like the engineers in the studio at the time that this stuff was being recorded, or other musicians from the band. Like I think Larry Graham is also going to be contributing some. I don't know if they're going to be pulling old Larry Graham interview footage or if he's going to be giving some new commentary on Sly and the Family Stone. But I want to hear more from the people who were dealing with the band and were around the scene at the time, rather than just, like Q-Tip, who, is a great MC / producer. I'm sure he's got a lot of wisdom and a lot of knowledge on Sly and the Family Stone. But when you are having the story of the artist told, wouldn't you want the people who have the most intimate insight and knowledge of that story to be the ones telling the story? So I wonder how this documentary is going to do that. But those names that I mentioned, those are going to be the primary contributors to this documentary. So again, I hope it's not too many of the new artists who are just giving their like, oh yeah, Sly, man, they inspired me like crazy. Like if it was Bruno Mars or something telling me how much Sly like impacted his career, I'd be like, cool, that's cool. But I kind of want to get educated about Sly and the Family Stone. I want the most accurate and honest information woven into this documentary. But yeah, going back to that trajectory of the band, they started to fall off, you could say, around the time they dropped Thank You for Letting Me Be Myself Again and Everybody Is a Star. So then they had a very unproductive 1970, and then they finally dropped their next album, There's a Riot Going On, in 1971. This is the album that, when you see like the greatest albums of all time or the greatest albums of the 70s or whatever, this is kind of the high watermark. This is the pinnacle of Sly and the Family Stone from a critical standpoint. This was commercially successful as well. Like the lead single from the album, Family Affair, that's their third and final #1 hit. So their 3 #1 singles were Everyday People, Thank You for Letting Me Be Myself Again, and Family Affair. And the 2 albums that are seen to be the greatest Sly and the Family Stone albums are Stand from 1969, and then There's a Riot Going On from 1971. And There's a Riot Going On is usually the highest up on those greatest albums of all time lists. It's pretty much the greatest Sly and the Family Stone album. But this album doesn't have the same levity of Stand or Dance to the Music. This one takes a darker tone. Like if you listen to the track 2, Just Like a Baby, just listen to the slow, almost heroin-like presentation of that song. It just has like a moodier vibe, a darker tone, and much of There's a Riot Going On kind of takes a similar, not necessarily similar to that song, but definitely a little darker than their most of their previous music. This isn't Everyday People. This is it feels like a heavier album, a more somber album. And there were a lot of pressures at the time as well. Like Sly was being impacted by like a lot of the Black Panther and Black Panther like organizations who were kind of pressuring him to de-integrate the band, replacing the white members, and to make more militant sounding music. There was that pressure that was tugging at Sly, and again, he's got his drug problems by this point. So yeah, there was just a lot going on at the time of There's a Riot Going On. So this wasn't like a warm and fuzzy happy time for the band, nor its members, nor society at large. When you think about like what was going on, there was, a lot of turmoil as well. But I'm also curious how they're going to cover, the juxtaposition between all the friction that's taking place within the band, their personal lives, their drug use, and them also during this time coming out with an album as remarkable as There's a Riot Going On. So yeah, this was, again, personally and band-wise, in terms of band functionality, they were on the decline, but they come out with this great album, which, you know, it's also said to be one of the first major albums ever to feature a drum machine. But this is also an album where there's less full band participation. Sly Stone supposedly played most of the music and then got other people on board. I think he got like Billy Preston and others to play in different parts of this album. It's a little bit clandestine and unknown in terms of who played what throughout There's a Riot Going On, but this wasn't a whole band just going at it in the way that they were on Dance to the Music or Life or Stand. No, this was like one person playing an instrument and then they're going back in and layering another instrument on top of it. It was pieced together more in a modern production style than the full band presentation of their previous work. And again, you didn't even have participation from all the band members at this time. Sly was largely kind of doing his own thing by this time. And there are some other fantastic songs on this album as well. I like Space Cowboy. I like Running Away. I really like You Caught Me Smiling. That's one of my favorite songs from the album. But yeah, fantastic album, darker tone, and they just continue to descend and fray and break up eventually beyond that point. Yes, they did have one more high moment with the album Fresh. That's the album with If You Want Me to Stay, one of the more popular Sly and the Family Stone songs. That was largely just Sly's work. It wasn't really a functioning band by that point. This is 1973. But yeah, in terms of the output, yeah, that's a fantastic song. Yes, there is some kind of forward thinking, future looking funk music on that album Fresh, but the Band of Brothers and stuff, that was long gone by the time they hit Fresh. And then Sly continues to descend by this point to where there is no band, but he's still releasing some music, you know, every few years, trying to make a comeback as Sly and the Family Stone, although it's not a full band, it's just him. And he has some stuff that was just under his name, Sly Stone, couple albums that he released like that, another couple Sly Stone albums that he released as Sly and the Family Stone, but he never reassembled the band fully. He did try to make a couple comebacks. He was working with different artists, contributing to different albums, again, working with some P-Funk Parliament work, but he never reclaimed the glory that he had between, I mean, this was their height right here. Their height was from 1968 to 1973, and even that is a stretch. It was a relatively short window, but it was huge success during that short window. And even the second half of that 68 to 73 window was largely a fraying and troubled band with a very troubled Sly Stone, who would also become incarcerated during drug problems. Decades later, fast forward to like the early to mid 2000s, by this point, he is basically out of money. He says that his manager tricked him into signing something that basically, you know, gave up a lot of his publishing and master's rights. So by the mid to late 2000s, he was without money and he was living in the Crenshaw district in Los Angeles, living out of a camper with a family that was trying to help him make sure that he ate at least one meal a day and allowed him to shower in their home. I don't know what the state of him is right now, but it was looking really bad. Now, the band is obviously in the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, and he did pop up in like 2006 and perform, I think it was at the Grammys, where he came out with the big old mohawk, kind of had a hunchback. He was looking down for a lot of the performances. It was exciting that it was Sly, but he was just so different, looked so different, sounded so different, not really recognizable, but he still had a very punk look. He didn't have the afro anymore, obviously, but he had a big blonde mohawk, and he did perform, but he never shook the reputation of leaving the stage early, not showing up to shows, which was another part of the band's downfall. They ended up kind of going broke as a band because nobody would be wanting to book them anymore, and no promoter would want to work with them because they were unreliable. They started missing several dates. Like, look at their 1971 and 1970 dates missed. Like, they became known for not showing up to their own shows, or for showing up to some of the shows but then Sly just leaving the stage like a few songs into the concert. It got all bad. So yeah, this is a very kind of high points and low points story when you talk about Sly Stone and Sly and the Family Stone. It's a very fascinating story, super interesting. I just want to see how they pull off this documentary. So again, I can't wait. I want to know your thoughts about Sly and the Family Stone. Are you into their music? Do you have a favorite Sly and the Family Stone album? Your favorite 2 or 3 Sly and the Family Stone songs? It would be even more interesting if those favorite songs are non-singles. Like everybody loves Everyday People and Family Affairs, certain songs, dance to the music. But are there any non-album singles like Everybody is a Star, which I love? Are there any other songs that you like from the band? And also, are you going to check this documentary out? I sure as hell am. But yeah, let me know your thoughts in the comments. And also, there was a fantastic book also by Questlove. I mean, this was produced by Questlove, but this was the Sly Stone memoir, kind of an autobiography. I'm reading through it for a second time. Very interesting. Like everything that you want to know about him coming up in school and how he got to be as talented, and as you know, he's a multi-instrumentalist, right? Plays like just everything that you could think of. This book kind of takes you through it all from the words and the mouth of Sly Stone. Yeah, very interesting book. It's called Thank You for Letting Me Be Myself. Love this book. I would highly encourage it. But yeah, let me know your thoughts about Sly Stone, Sly and the Family Stone, and your excitement level over this documentary in the comments. Like the video, subscribe to the channel if you love music like I do. I'm Woog. Thanks for tuning in.